It's kind of interesting. I was my junior year of dental school. I was up in New York doing a 2-week externship at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. And I was visiting a friend because I'm from Long Island. And I was at my friend's parents' house, and one of his parents' friends says to me, "What do you know about dental implants?" I go, "I don't know anything. They're not teaching us it." So I go in the next day to the externship, and I say to one of the oral surgeons, "What can you tell me about implants?" And he just looks at me and doesn't say a word, walks off. And I'm thinking, all right, what did I say wrong? And he came back with a stack of articles and said, "Here, take these home and read these. You can keep them." And it was all these implant journals. And they really, I graduated in '86. They really were not at the undergraduate level teaching anything at all about implants. So I started getting very interested in it. And then after I graduated, I started getting more interested. And then I took a maxi course in '93 that meant 3 days once a month for a year. And I started doing subs and blades and everything related to that. And I'm sort of an education freak in a sense. I like learning. So I started taking courses, and I met Lenny Linkow and Charlie Weiss, who are pioneers in implant dentistry. I took the last class that Tatum gave on sinus lifts in the US before he moved to France. So it was kind of interesting. I got to meet some of the early leaders, Carl Misch and others, that were doing things in implant dentistry, and it's sort of the bug sort of bit. And which sort of leads me into my first article. I basically had a guy that came in who was a retired engineer, and he had a 40-year-old lower subperiosteal implant that had been done by, and I can't remember their name, the guys who did the first sub in the world. They had done this on him. And then he saw Lenny Linkow, and Linkow told him all kinds of stuff. And he said, "Oh, that's like," so he left. Linkow consultation comes down to me because Linkow's up in New York, and I knew Lenny, and I call Lenny, I go, "What's going on?" He goes, "Oh, this guy seemed like he was going to be a pain in the ass," because he kept asking all these questions. Like, Lenny didn't want to deal with it. So I looked and I said, "Well, this lower sub that's 40 years old is failing. I would take it out and I'd put another sub in." And the guy had the sub placed when he was 26 years old. So that's really young. That's why it lasted so long, because of age. Most people were going into this in their 60s and 70s. So I gave him a consult. He basically had gotten a consult from another guy who did a lot of subs, who worked with 2 oral surgeons. The patient contacts me and says, "Well, I decided I'm going to have them do it because they've done more subs than you have, but you seem like you know what you're doing, or can you be in the OR when they do the work?" I said, "Hey, this sounds really interesting. Can I photograph it, maybe write it up?" And he goes, "Absolutely." So I'm in the OR. They get the sub out. They're pulling on some tissue in the right ramus area. And one of the oral surgeons turns to the other and says, "Scalpel." And I lean forward and I say, "I think that's the inferior alveolar nerve." And they look at each other and they push it back in. So luckily the guy had paresthesia beforehand. But so I document this thing. Back in those days, the only journal that you could probably get this published in was the Journal Oral Implantology. At the time, Norman Creenan was the editor-in-chief. He had been editor-in-chief for like 30 years. He was a DDS, an MD, and had a PhD in English, and was renowned for being super critical. So I send the article into him. Norman was in his 70s, didn't do email. 2 months later, he sends me back the thing with a letter saying, "I've accepted it for publication. I've made some changes." I'm looking through the thing. I can't find any of the changes he made. I call him up and he says, "No, you're a very good writer. I just made some grammatical changes." So I always said, if Norman told me I sucked, I probably never would have written another thing, but that was encouraging. And everybody I've spoke to, whoever dealt with Norman, said, "Oh my God, it was a nightmare to get an article past him." So I said, "Hey, I must have some talent at something." So I just kept writing from there. So it's been an interesting journey.